Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Weller and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. It's getting close to Christmas. Snowmans are nice, but that's actually not the snowman I want to talk about. I want to talk about the Yeti. Now, the Yeti is one of those creatures that Dungeons and Dragons has appropriated. Let's get real. This is not the monster or the creature that has been created by somebody because they were like fantastically gifted or anything like that. It's like many monsters, they are appropriated from a different location. So what I thought I would do is I would go over as much of the Yeti as possible to give you the best idea of whether the Yeti is the sort of creature you want to use in your game or not. So this is the Yeti Dungeons and Dragons monster lore. Sometimes confused with the abominable snowman, or can I even say that word? Abominable snowman. The Yeti is a distant cousin to the great carnivorous apes of warmer climates. An adult Yeti stands about 8 feet tall and is covered in long white fur. Well, is it? We'll get to that. The Yeti's feet and hands are wide and flat, which helps them disperse their weight, which is anywhere from about 300 to 400 pounds on treacherous snow fields. Otherwise it would just slide around. A Yeti can travel on all fours like an ape, but can actually fight very comfortably standing erect. Unlike most apes and gorillas, the Yeti does not have an opposing toe on its feet. And the Yeti doesn't wear clothing or ornamentation. The smell of a Yeti is very subtle in a cold climate, but in the confines of a warm area, then you get a very strong smell. It's a very strong, musky odor. The eyes of the Yeti are icy blue and almost colorless in some cases. A Yeti's claws and flesh is ivory white. And you might have noticed that I haven't said that the Yeti's hair is ivory white, because there's something else to say about that. Now, when it comes to the biology of the Yeti, frankly, there is a little bit, but not a huge amount. Unlike many Arctic creatures, the Yeti does not have a thick layer of body fat to keep them warm. Instead, the Yeti relies on the special properties of its thick, warm fur that consists of a layer of dense underfur and an outer layer of guard hairs. This is very similar to what a polar bear would have. The Yeti's shaggy guard hairs appear white, but are actually transparent due to two mutated genes that actually influence the myelin production within the body of that hair. The Yeti's fur actually absorbs heat, and making it extremely cold if you actually touch it. It actually absorbs the heat, so don't touch the Yeti. You will actually wind up having the heat transferred into it. The heat absorbing property of a Yeti's fur can work against it also, and it can suffer quite significant injuries from heat, anywhere from 50% or greater compared to a normal creature. So one of the aspects of this is it means that a Yeti tends to fear things that create heat, but also fears fire. Yeti have a transparent second eyelid, which allows the Yeti to see in blowing snow or blizzards or storms, and it prevents the eyes from freezing shut completely in extreme temperatures, that's where it lives, is in extreme temperatures. The Yeti has an extremely well developed sense of smell, because the brain is dominated by a large olfactory cortex. Like a lot of animals, they often have a bigger part of the brain designated to smell. It has many more smell sensitive receptors as well compared to another creature, and it also has mobile nostrils to help determine the direction of a scent, much like a dog, where a dog can actually change the direction of its nostril to figure out exactly where that smell is coming from. Yeti dark vision is a result of the pupils of the eye being much larger than a human's, because the pupils are quite large. This allows more light in to hit the back of the retina, and as a result of that, they're much more likely to be able to see in the darkness. They also have more rod cells in the fovea of the eye compared to cone cells, which pick up colour. Rod cells pick up differences between light, and cones help differentiate that light. And they have a lot less of that. So that means that when it registers light on the retina, it's picking up mostly light rather than differentiating and getting colour. That doesn't mean that it looks or sees like a dog, but it's kind of similar. The Yeti stomach can actually process meat and vegetable matter, but because flora doesn't usually survive at high altitudes, the Yeti's diet is mostly meat, animals that can actually survive at high altitude. As a result, sages have assumed the Yeti is in fact carnivorous, or a carnivore, but it's not. It just happens to have, that's all it's around to actually eat in its environment quite often. As a result of eating meat, this releases a hormone within the body of a Yeti, making it far more aggressive. So if a Yeti were to have a diet that was mostly vegetables and fruit, then it would become less aggressive. But as a result of the meat, much like humans, they become more aggressive. And this tends to be the case with most carnivores anyway. Low oxygen environments at high altitude are something that the Yeti thrives in, and this is because the aerobic muscles have a higher number of mitochondria, and they also have far more blood vessels within the body to actually pump blood through. And their blood is actually very special because it's much more effective at extracting oxygen than other blood is. So everything is built to be able to function at a high altitude with as little oxygen as possible. So the only way to actually survive is to ensure that the creature has a good system for keeping itself warm internally and also processing oxygen. So you have to bring in more oxygen into the body, otherwise perish. Now, combat with the Yeti. What does that look like? The Yeti it's basically a very fierce hunter of the polar regions. All Yetis stalk at their prey and lay ambushes, attempting to gain some sort of surprise on them if they can. Our favourite trick is to go ahead of their prey. So the Yeti moves ahead of their prey, and then they will lie in a depression in the ground or in the snow, and sometimes they will even dig a shallow pit and then cover themselves with snow so that they can't be seen. Such Yeti excavations or holes can be detected only by natives of the Arctic regions usually, and even if you are a native of an Arctic region, then there's only probably like a 25% chance that you'll actually notice them in their hiding spot. Against the snow, the Yeti is almost completely invisible due to its colorization, until the prey usually get somewhere between 10 yards away. Under a thick layer of snow, a Yeti is completely invisible. Like, you would not be able to detect them at all. So if you thought you had good eyes, you probably won't spot them. You may be able to smell them though. Any opponent surprised by a Yeti might be paralyzed or go rigid with fright for about a half a minute. And this indicates that they have actually looked into those icy blue depths of the Yeti's eyes. Because an opponent that looks into the eyes of a Yeti will become paralyzed. And then they're completely at the mercy of the Yeti. And of course, then they will then bring in their claws and tear them to pieces or crush them to death. Although tearing them to pieces first is probably going to be their first choice. Although the Yeti does actually have fangs, it doesn't usually attack with the fangs. Instead, it prefers to use its formidable claws. A Yeti's claws can be used to grapple a victim and then pull them into their chilling gaze. Or even to just chill them, because remember, contact with the Yeti, they absorb heat, and so therefore they could wind up crushing you and freezing you like an ice block. The habitat of the Yeti. Although the Yeti is of average intelligence, it actually has no civilization that we know of. The Yeti can use simple tools, including man-made tools, but it will not make tools of its own. It doesn't do that sort of thing. Yeti live in ice caves and hills and mountains. Sometimes these ice caves are natural, and sometimes they have been excavated by the Yeti or enlarged to accommodate a family, should they need to do so. Most Yeti treasure consists of items recovered from the bodies of explorers or adventurers. Life is harsh in the Arctic, so friends, food are hard to find, and it really does mean that making survival and reproduction are really the Yeti's ultimate goal. That's really all it's really focused on, rather than other things. The Yeti are extremely reclusive, and they also possess an eerie howl that strikes fear into those that hear it. The Yeti will associate only with its immediate family usually, which means that that will consist of a mature adult with the young, and then of course the young will then fend for themselves once they reach maturity. A Yeti family usually consists, as I said, of an adult male with 1 to 3 females, and there's a 50% chance that they'll have between 1 and 6 female young with a female present. So if there is a female involved, there's probably going to be anywhere between 1 to half a dozen younglings. In a hunting pack, the largest Yeti is usually the male, and the next largest ones are usually its mates. Any other Yeti in a hunting pack is usually quite a bit smaller, and they will be the younger male or females that have been the offspring of the couple, but they do leave the family relatively soon. So it's not like a Yeti family stays together indefinitely. The ecology of the Yeti. Any living creature not of the Yeti's family is usually considered potential food, including other Yeti. This does make them kind of, well, they're not foolhardy, okay, and they're not going to attack you unless they're absolutely starving. So if a Yeti were to attack you, it's probably, particularly if you've got a large party, they're only going to do that if they've got no other choice to do so. The Yeti's typical diet consists of herd creatures such as caribou, bears, wolves, and other creatures that inhabit the snowy mountains in which they live, and also any other creatures that are living at high altitude. So there are many birds that could potentially be caught as well. The Yeti may turn to scavenging in hard times. As I said, their stomach can process meat and vegetable matter. The resilient Yeti range across a wide area in search of food, usually anywhere from 15 miles in all directions from its lair. And they do lair, they do have a cave or a home. Yeti claws and teeth have a value because of their rarity. The rarity of the creature is the biggest factor. The ivory of the Yeti sells for about 1 gold piece for a tooth or a claw on the open market. And then it's a different story with the Yeti fur because this is prized by those who certainly live in a cold environmental climate. It's got an extraordinary ability, even with it not attached to the Yeti anymore. The hide and the hair actually keeps you incredibly warm, so it retains some of its properties even in death. A fully grown Yeti pelt would fetch somewhere in the vicinity of 300 gold pieces on the open market if you were to go and purchase one. Now, how would you go about incorporating the Yeti into your adventure? You could have a Yeti family who are searching for the young stumble upon the characters, or you could have a player character rescue the Yeti's young from, say, a predator and then return them to their family. You could also potentially have Yeti causing avalanches by burrowing into the snow or the ice shelves and then causing an avalanche to bury settlements that are close by to wherever they lair or are residing. I'm going to suggest, what about something like a Yeti Winter Olympics, where you have different events that they take part in? Now, I know this is kind of going outside of the normal lore for the Yeti, but stay with me. I'm suggesting ice skating on a frozen lake, or what about skiing, like skiing down a mountain would be fun. I think the one that I like the most is the idea, and I've been putting this forward for a long time, snowboarding Yetis is one of my favourite things to do in games. And then, of course, you've got the bobsled, or just the plain old sled. I'm sure you know what I mean. You know what winter sports are. I'm sure you can figure out how to incorporate winter sports in the Yeti. You could also have the Yeti hunting the characters like a horror story, a bit like Deliverance. So they don't never see the monster. They just see the remnants, and things just keep disappearing. And they might hear the howl of the Yeti, and then of course it's tracking them down. So it's more like rather than we go and search them out, it's hunting them. You could have an Arctic Yeti bartender that actually works, say, in an environment that is like a town and a cold environment, and in town there's like a bar, an open bar, where the Yeti serves cold drinks because they can use their gaze or breath to actually cool the drinks. An idea that AJ Pickett had put forward to us as part of the Dungeon Master Roundtable, and I do need to thank a lot of people from the Dungeon Master Roundtable because a lot of their ideas are here. And that is, what about Yeti that are desert folk, that wrap themselves in rags, who have partially acclimatized themselves to the desert's heat, but actually the desert gets very cold at night, and maybe that's when they actually move around. They have dark vision, so maybe they sleep during the day in some sort of cave location and then venture out at night in the desert to hunt. You could also have a town water supply that dries up. And why has the town water supply dried up? Well, because every town water supply does seem to dry up and go wrong or get poisoned. But no, it dries up because the Yetis have actually frozen the water flow or river or stream that feeds into the town, and that flow of water is coming from the mountains, so they actually freeze it up at its source, and so the water supply disappears because the Yeti have decided, no, we're not providing you with water anymore, we want you to go away, so we'll freeze it solid. You could have a merchandise line of Yeti cups that actually magically keep your drinks cold if you wanted to, or you could have Yeti stealing dried meats from a local butcher shop, or just stealing meat full stop. Why is all the meat disappearing? Well, it's because the Yeti comes down from the mountains and poaches what they want. So a few different ideas that you might be able to use in your game. Now, how do you defeat a Yeti? It's a good question. Don't look into the eyes of the Yeti because of that chilling gaze. And fighting from a distance with ranged weapons and spells is probably a good idea. Avoid fighting in close quarters with the Yeti because of its sharp claws, and also its gaze. That's always a big factor because its gaze only has a certain distance. Remain alert for danger would certainly help. Avoid being ambushed by the Yeti, and then getting a blessing would certainly help ward off the magical effect of the Yeti's gaze, because that chilling gaze is magical rather than got any kind of biological chemical effect going on. Okay, so it's definitely a magical effect. Waving a flaming torch at a Yeti or creating magical fire or just creating fire would likely frighten off the Yeti because they are afraid of fire. And then mind affecting spells might likely be more successful over magic that targets its impressive physical structure and physique. So go for the mind, not the body. Now, where did the Yeti come from? In terms of publication, where do we find the Yeti? Well, originally the Yeti was a Himalayan mountain folk story that the Sherpa have been putting forth for quite a long time. That was appropriated by TSR, who created Dungeons and Dragons in the first place. They then put it into the Monster Manual for First Ed Edition in 1977, and then it was released again in the Monstrous Manual for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Second Ed Edition in 1993, I believe. You also find it in the Oriental Adventures book for Third Ed Edition in 2001, and then it comes up again in Frostburn 3.5 D&D in 2004. And then we follow up with the Dungeon Master Manual, or should I say not the Dungeon Master Manual, the Monster Manual for Third Ed Edition, for Monster Manual 3 for 4th Ed Edition. So there were actually 3 monster manuals during 4th ed edition, and the third one they put out in 2010 had the Yeti in it. And then, of course, we have the monster manual for 5th ed edition in 2014. And there were other publications where the Yeti did show up as well, but I thought those were the most noteworthy, the ones that I really need to mention out of all the ones that are certainly available. Look, the Yeti is a fun monster. I have always enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun monster from the get-go. I've used it quite a lot in my games. I hope that you use it in your games as well. So please let me know in the comments section what your experience with the Yeti has been, any questions you might have, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.